1227, when Genghis Khan passed away, he bequeathed the largest empire the world had ever seen. Yet it's seldom known that within 4 decades, this immense realm was mired in civil strife, and a century later, it had entirely fragmented. What factors led to this outcome? How could such a formidable empire self-destruct? Crucially, could the Mongol Empire have endured longer if its successors had pursued a different course? Before we delve deeper, please tell me in the comments where you're viewing this video from and what time it is for you. I'm genuinely curious. Today, we'll explore a lesser-known chapter of history, the Mongol Empire following Genghis Khan's death. This narrative is rich with ambition, power, momentous decisions, and unforeseen repercussions. To comprehend the reasons behind the Mongol Empire's collapse, one must grasp Genghis Khan's legacy. Upon his death in 1227, he dispersed authority among his 4 primary sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Ogadai, and Tolui. This wasn't merely an allocation of inheritance. It was a division of an empire that spanned from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. Jochi received the Western territories, which later evolved into the Golden Horde in Russia. Chagatai was granted Central Asia. Ogadai, the 3rd son, was designated Great Khan, the direct successor. And Tolui inherited the Mongol heartland. This might seem logical, right? But this very arrangement planted the initial seeds of disintegration, as Genghis Khan had not established a clear system for succession. He relied on personal loyalty, devotion to a specific individual, rather than to a nation or the concept of the Mongol Empire. And with that individual's demise, so too did that allegiance dissipate. Ogadai ascended the throne in 1229, 2 years after his father's death. His selection was intriguing. Unlike his brothers, Ogadai wasn't a preeminent warrior. He recognized this, and therein lay his strength. Ogadai was humble, a rare trait for those wielding absolute power. He was adept at listening to his commanders, leveraging the talents of others. He was a pragmatist, focused on results rather than methods. Under Ogadai's leadership, the Mongol Empire continued its expansion. In 1234, he finalized the conquest of the Yuan Dynasty in China. Campaigns commenced in Western Asia, and most notably, he launched an invasion of Europe. From 1237 to 1241, Mongol armies under Dadu Khan devastated Rus, Poland, and Hungary. Cities fell one after another. European forces, including the Knights Templar, were vanquished. In April 1241, at the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, the Mongols inflicted a crushing defeat on the Hungarian army. The path to Vienna and the rest of Europe lay open. And then they stopped. Why? Because in December 1241, Ogadai passed away. He died after a night of heavy drinking, hardly a heroic end for the ruler of the world's largest empire. According to Mongol tradition, all princes were required to return for a kurultai, a council, to elect a successor. Dadu Khan and the Western army retreated from Europe and never returned. European history shifted because of a bottle of wine. This is our first reminder. Personal decisions, no matter how minor they seem, can alter the course of history. However, what happened next was even more remarkable than Ogadai's death. For the subsequent 5 years, from 1241 to 1246, the Mongol Empire had no great Khan. Instead, his widow, Toghon Temür, ruled. Toghon was a shrewd and ambitious woman. She spent 5 years forging alliances, eliminating rivals, and ensuring her son, Guyuk, would become the next great Khan. And she succeeded. Guyuk ascended to the throne in 1246, but Guyuk and Dadu Khan, the commander of the European campaign, shared a mutual animosity. Both were grandsons of Genghis Khan. Both believed they were more deserving of power than the other. In 1248, Guyuk mobilized his army to confront Dadu, but died en route. The cause of death remained unclear, possibly illness, possibly poison. The empire was once again leaderless. This time, Dadu Khan, powerful enough to claim the Great Khan title for himself, declined it. Perhaps because he was too far from Karakoram, the imperial capital. perhaps because he didn't want to abandon his newly conquered territories in Russia. Instead, he endorsed Mongol, another grandson of Genghis Khan, from the Tului lineage. Mongol came to power in 1251, and he did what his predecessors had not. He eliminated his opponents. Mongol orchestrated a bloody purge. Members of the Ogaday and Chagatai families who had plotted against him were executed. This marked the first instance in the Mongol Empire's history where royal blood was shed for political reasons. A line had been crossed, and once a line is crossed for the first time, it becomes easier to cross it again and again. Mongol was a capable ruler. He controlled expenditures, conducted a census, and protected civilians. The populace admired him. Under Mongol's leadership, the empire continued to expand. In 1258, his brother Hulagu received orders to conquer Western Asia, swiftly capturing Baghdad and thus ending the 500-year reign of the Abbasid Caliphate. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, then the world's most extensive repository of knowledge, was utterly destroyed. Legend has it that the Tigris River turned black from the ink of countless books cast into its waters. Simultaneously, another of Mongol's brothers, Kublai, was tasked with completing the subjugation of China. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly, and the Mongol Empire reached its historical zenith. However, Mongol Khan passed away in 1259 during the siege of Diaoyu Castle in China. This event had profound repercussions, as Mongol had not designated an heir. His two brothers, Kublai and Arek Böke, both asserted their claims to the title of Great Khan, and neither was willing to yield. The Toluid Civil War, which spanned from 1260 to 1264, marked a pivotal moment in the Mongol Empire's trajectory. This was more than a mere sibling rivalry. It represented a clash between two fundamentally distinct visions for the empire's future. Arek Böke championed the traditionalist faction, remaining in Karakorum, the Mongols' ancient capital. He firmly believed the empire's heart ought to stay in the steppes, where the Mongols, as nomads, could uphold their ancestral customs. In stark contrast, Kublai was in China, where he recognized the necessity of adapting to local civilization to effectively govern a settled empire. He engaged Chinese officials, studied Chinese characters, and demonstrated reverence for Chinese culture. This was not merely a contest between two leaders, but a collision of two ideologies. Should the Mongols cling to their nomadic identity or accommodate themselves to ruling conquered peoples? Initially, Arek Böke held the advantage. He controlled the capital and convened a Kurultai, where he was proclaimed Great Khan. However, Kublai possessed a more crucial asset: resources. Kublai dominated northern China, one of the wealthiest regions globally. He commanded a significantly larger army, comprising not only Mongol cavalry, but also Khitan and Jurchen warriors, whose fighting styles mirrored those of the Mongols, alongside tens of thousands of Han infantry. Kublai employed tactics of economic warfare, blockading Mongolia and cutting off food supplies, which led to famine in Karakorum. In 1261, Arek Böke was compelled to engage in battle, suffering a defeat at Shimiltai and subsequently retreating. 10 days later, he made another attempt near Jinganshan, but the outcome was a stalemate. Yet the outcome of wars is determined not solely by battles, but by logistics. Arek Böke relied on the Yenisei River Valley to supply his army, but this proved insufficient against an adversary who controlled all the resources of northern China. In 1264, Arek Böke capitulated, and Kublai imprisoned him. 2 years later, in 1266, Arek Böke died mysteriously in captivity. Many suspected Kublai had poisoned his own brother, though the truth remains elusive. However, one thing is certain: Kublai won the war, but shattered the empire's unity. Kublai's victory came at a steep price. The three Western Uluses, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Ulus in Central Asia, and Hulagu's Ilkhanate in Persia, refused to acknowledge Kublai as Great Khan. While they continued to send envoys and maintain diplomatic ties, they functioned as de facto independent entities. Worse still, the Uluses began to quarrel amongst themselves. Burqa Khan of the Golden Horde was a devout Muslim. When Hulagu, ruler of the Ilkhanate of Persia, orchestrated the massacre of Muslims in Baghdad, Burq was enraged. In 1262, war erupted between the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate of Persia, pitting Mongols against Mongols. Berke even forged an alliance with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, an adversary of the entire Mongol Empire, to fight against Hulagu. This represented an extraordinarily significant historical juncture. For the first time, religious and regional interests superseded loyalty to the lineage of Genghis Khan. Meanwhile, Kublai contended with Kaidu, a grandson of Ogedei. Kaidu held sway over a portion of the Chagatai Ulus and consistently challenged Kublai's authority. The protracted war between Kublai and Kaidu spanned decades, from the 1260s until Kaidu's death in 1301, depleting the resources of both sides. In 1304, a peace treaty was signed between the Uluses, nominally recognizing the supremacy of the Yuan Dynasty. However, this was merely a formality. In reality, the unified Mongol Empire ceased to exist, with the four Uluses operating as independent states, each pursuing its own agenda. Kublai Khan was not an inadequate successor. Indeed, he was among the most gifted rulers of the Mongol Empire. In 1271, Kublai formally established the Yuan Dynasty, marking the first instance in Chinese history when a foreign-founded dynasty governed all of China. By 1279, he had completed the conquest of the southern Song Dynasty, bringing the entirety of China under Mongol dominion. Kublai was a pragmatic ruler. He employed Chinese officials, but retained Mongols in key positions. He respected Chinese culture, but ensured that Mongols did not fully assimilate. Kublai instituted two capitals, Chengdu, known as Xanadu in the north, which allowed Mongols to uphold their nomadic traditions, and Dadu, now modern-day Beijing in China. He cultivated commerce, leading to the flourishing of the Silk Road during his reign. The renowned Italian merchant Marco Polo visited China during this era and was hosted at Kublai's court for an extended period. Yet, Kublai also made significant blunders. There were two costly attempts to invade Japan in 1274 and 1281. Both expeditions failed completely, as typhoons, which the Japanese termed kamikaze, or divine wind, obliterated thousands of warships. Additionally, military campaigns were launched into Vietnam and Java, both proving unsuccessful. These endeavors not only incurred immense financial costs, but also undermined the perception of him as an invincible warrior, a cornerstone of Mongol prestige. Upon his death in 1294, Kublai left behind an empire in decline. His successors lacked his strength. Between 1294 and 1368, a mere 74 years, the Yuan dynasty saw 11 emperors. On average, each emperor ruled for fewer than 7 years. From 1308 to 1332, there were 8 emperors, 2 of whom were assassinated, all dying young. This turmoil stemmed from the absence of clear succession protocols. Following an emperor's death, various factions would fiercely contend to install their preferred candidate on the throne. Central authority waned, and power shifted to local warlords who exploited armies to assert their own dominance rather than serving the empire. Furthermore, the Yuan dynasty failed to gain legitimacy among the Han Chinese. The Mongols maintained a distinct identity, resisting assimilation into Chinese culture. Mongol women did not bind their feet, a practice considered a sign of high status in China. They wore their own attire, consumed their traditional foods, and celebrated their distinct holidays. This created a profound societal rift. The Mongols constituted the ruling class, enjoying tax exemptions and privileges, yet they were a minority. The Han Chinese, forming the majority population, harbored resentment towards them. Beginning in the late 1340s, the nation was plagued by natural disasters, droughts, floods, and famine. The Yuan government proved incapable of addressing these crises effectively. In 1351, the Red Turban Rebellion erupted, starting as a peasant uprising, but swiftly escalating into a nationwide revolt. The last Yuan emperor, Toghon Temür, was a weak and politically indifferent ruler. He spent his time engaged in esoteric Tibetan Buddhist rituals and various amusements. In 1368, as Ming forces approached Beijing, Toghon Temür did not even attempt to defend the capital. He simply fled. He retreated north to Shangdu, then to Karakoram, dying 2 years later in Yingchang, Inner Mongolia. The Mongol Empire's presence in China came to an end. While the Yuan Dynasty collapsed in China, other Mongol khanates faced similar difficulties. The Ilkhanate in Persia was the first to fall. In 1335, following the death of Abu Sa'id Bahadur, with no clear heir, the state fragmented into numerous smaller entities. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia also splintered, and its various factions were in constant conflict. The Golden Horde in Russia endured the longest, until the 15th century, but it too gradually weakened and dissolved into smaller khanates. In 1552, Russian Tsar Ivan the Terrible vanquished the last remaining Mongol principalities in Kazan and Astrakhan, signaling the end of Mongol suzerainty in Europe. As for the Mongols in Mongolia, they reverted to a nomadic lifestyle, dispersed among warring tribes. Karakoram, the great capital of Genghis Khan, was razed by Chinese forces in 1380. The unified Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in history, ceased to exist. Nevertheless, its story extends beyond its downfall. Despite the Mongol Empire's relatively brief existence, approximately 150 years from Genghis Khan's unification to its complete dissolution, its legacy endures. Economically, the Mongols established the most prosperous Silk Road in history. They introduced the Yam system, a network of postal stations that ensured rapid communication across thousands of miles. They safeguarded merchants, reduced taxes, and standardized weights and measures. During this period, concepts such as bills of exchange, deposit banks, and insurance flowed from Asia to Europe. Culturally, thanks to the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, culture and knowledge disseminated freely across Eurasia. Islamic mathematics and astronomy reached Europe. Papermaking and printing technologies spread westward from China. Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta, and many other explorers could travel safely across Asia, which was unimaginable before the Mongol era. Administratively, many Mongol governance systems were adopted by subsequent dynasties. The Chinese Ming Dynasty, for example, incorporated aspects of the Mongol garrison system. Ransan monarchs embraced Mongol administrative techniques and military tactics. Yet, their saga wasn't without its darker chapters. It's widely speculated that the Black Death, the plague that claimed 1/3 of Europe's populace, spread globally along the Silk Road. Millions perished during the Mongol conquests, with cities like Baghdad and Samarkand left in ruins, and countless libraries and cultural artifacts destroyed. History, after all, isn't simply black and white, it's a spectrum of grays. So, what pertinent lessons can we glean from the Mongol Empire's narrative post-Genghis Khan? The initial lesson is that a lack of structured systems guarantees unstable succession. Genghis Khan forged an empire based significantly on his personal bonds of loyalty. Following his demise, no robust mechanism was in place to maintain its cohesion, forcing his successors to perpetually strive to re-establish this allegiance. Today, flourishing organizations grasp this principle, constructing systems, fostering cultures, and establishing values, elements that transcend any single individual. The second insight reveals that diversity necessitates unity. The Mongol Empire encompassed a myriad of cultures, faiths, and ways of life, a dynamic that simultaneously served as a source of immense power and inherent weakness. When the overarching objective, such as territorial expansion, waned, these differences fractured the empire. Muslims within the Golden Horde found it impossible to reconcile with the massacre of fellow Muslims in Baghdad. Traditional Mongols were disconcerted by Kublai's increasing Sinicization. Thus, the takeaway is clear. Diversity is advantageous, but it demands cohesion through fundamental shared values. The third lesson underscores the principle of adapt or perish. Kublai Khan recognized the need to integrate into Chinese culture to govern China effectively, yet he also strived to preserve his Mongol identity. This delicate equilibrium ultimately proved elusive for the Yuan Dynasty. They were never Chinese enough to be fully accepted by the Han, yet they became too Chinese for the traditional Mongols. This dilemma resonates with contemporary global corporations. How to localize while retaining a unified global identity? The Mongols wrestled with this very question 7 centuries ago. The fourth lesson teaches that power abhors a vacuum. Whenever a great Khan passed away, a period of anticipation, occasionally spanning years, would ensue until a successor was chosen. Within this power void, factions would consolidate influence, forge alliances, and prepare for conflict. The lesson here is that uncertainty in leadership within any organization inevitably spawns chaos. A clear and robust succession plan is absolutely crucial. The fifth and final lesson is that winning a war doesn't equate to winning the peace. Kublai's victory in the civil war against Arik-Boka came at a steep cost, the ultimate fracturing of the empire. The Western Ulises never acknowledged Kublai's authority. Sometimes, the manner in which victory is achieved is more significant than the victory itself. Returning to our initial inquiry, could the Mongol Empire have endured longer if its inheritors had made different choices? The answer is, quite possibly. Had Genghis Khan established clear rules for succession, rather than relying on a Kurultai where power often went to the strongest rather than the most suitable? Had Ogedei consumed less and lived longer to complete the conquest of Europe and build a more robust administrative system? Had Mongke designated a successor before his death, thereby averting the civil war between Kublai and Arik-Boka? Had Kublai found a way to reconcile the Western Khanates instead of allowing them to become completely independent? Had the Yuan emperors after Kublai been more competent and more engaged in governance? These are all possibilities. However, history does not entertain hypotheticals. It records only what transpired. What did transpire is this: the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, disintegrated for reasons mirrored in the fall of many other great empires. These include an underdeveloped system of succession, internal power struggles, an inability to adapt to emerging challenges, and a growing chasm between the ruling elite and the populace. The chronicle of the Mongol Empire after Genghis Khan isn't merely a past event. It's a narrative for the present and the future. The same challenges the Mongols confronted: how to maintain unity amidst diversity, how to adapt without forfeiting identity, how to facilitate seamless power transitions, are the very challenges we face today within our families, professions, and societies. History serves as a mirror, offering not answers, but the correct questions. Therefore, reflect on your own life and your organization. Are you building resilient systems, or are you solely reliant on individuals? Are you preparing for leadership shifts or allowing chaos to unfold? Are you adapting to change or clinging to the status quo? These were the questions the Mongols encountered, and the responses to which shaped global history. If this narrative offered you a fresh perspective on history, please like this video and subscribe to support the channel in producing more quality content. Let me know in the comments what you believe was the most crucial element contributing to the Mongol Empire's downfall, and if we are replicating similar missteps in today's world. Also, remember you haven't yet addressed the question posed at the very beginning. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Please share that information in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next video.